All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we continue our verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book study through the entire Bible. We're going to continue on. I am doing a little excursion and I'm diving, diving more deeply into the subject of hell. Let me read what Jesus said. We're in chapter 12, Luke chapter 12, and verse 4, Jesus says, "And I say to you, my friends, don't fear those that kill the body, and after that can do nothing more, but I will show you the one to fear. Fear him who has authority to throw people into hell after death. Yes, I say to you, this is the one to fear." And we've been talking about this subject of hell. Jesus talks probably more about hell than anyone. As far as the anyone, and so the idea of eternal suffering in hell, eternal burning in hell, is a terrifying thought. The question is, what does it mean? The question is, or what does it? In other words, let's talk about: does Jesus really mean that there are going to be people who are literally being burned in the fire? So I want to kind of flush this out because it is important for us to understand. Although I'll tell you that I don't care if I understand it or not, because I'm not going to hell. And this is why I have accepted the gospel. I've obeyed the gospel. And so that is the solution. And then the question would be, why would you go to hell, right? Whatever it is, why would you go? And that becomes really the real issue, not our understanding or lack thereof of what exactly hell is. It is without a doubt pictured enough as terrifying, horrible enough to say, no, you shouldn't go. But why? Why are people going? Now, there is only one reason why people are going to hell. It's because they don't obey the gospel. Now, the reason why people are in the predicament or the threat of going to hell is because of the sin nature. So, Adam's sin, when Adam rebelled, okay, then that threw all of mankind into a state of alienation from God. What we inherited from Adam was his sin nature. So right there, that alone, that alone is why every person born since Adam has been born hopelessly lost. Hopelessly lost. And hopelessly doomed to face the wrath of God. So what we also have is the Bible telling, Jesus himself saying, "For God loved the world in this way, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." He goes on to say, "For God did not send his Son to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." So why isn't the world being saved? Why isn't the world accepting the love that God has poured out in his Son, Jesus Christ? So that's the reason why people are going to hell. I have been saying throughout our verse by verse study, our journey verse by verse, the one thing that is troubling, sad, pathetic is what sin has done to mankind. that it's the sin nature causes man to rebel against God. He becomes hardened in his sin. And this is not something that is, you're unaware. It's not something. It's even hard to comprehend. It's hard to understand because millions of people. It's not that they don't know. There are people that really think that there millions of people dying because they've never heard the gospel, and so therefore they're going to go to hell because simply they just never heard. It's not like, for example, people who this is a stretch of an illustration here, but it's not like there's people who have never heard of the opportunity of America, therefore they will stay in their miserable countries, as opposed to those who are traveling right now. As we know, we have a immigration crisis at the border, and why? Because people have heard of the opportunities in our nation, and they want that freedom, those opportunities, those jobs, things like that. But people reject God in full. We see this from again, we kind of go back to Adam's sin. And again, this helps us to understand why people will face God's wrath. Now, there are people who have been misrepresenting what the wrath of God is and why. And as I said, there are people that the way that there are people that the kind of representation is that God is just mean. You even hear that with people saying that the God of the Old Testament is a mean, angry God, and that's just flatly not true. That God was not a mean, angry God in the Old Testament. And that's the way he's pictured. When you read through the Old Testament, what you will find is that God is the exact opposite, that he is abundantly merciful. That despite his goodness, despite his mercy, Israel continued to rebelled against God. But I jumped ahead a little bit. Let's go back to Adam. Adam, God creates man. Right? And literally, Adam has the world. He's number one. God says, all the world is yours. Right? Rule the world, rule the animals. God creates this garden, his personal paradise, his estate, his home. And then God says, but the man, it's not good for the man to be alone. I'll make him a helper meet for him. And so he creates Eve, his wife, from his rib. Now man is complete. He has everything, right? The world, literally, a wife. He has the most beautiful woman in the world, right? Of course, she's the only one, but the most beautiful woman in the world. God tells him just one thing, right? One thing. You have everything except, okay, one thing. You cannot eat of the tree in the center of the garden, the tree of knowledge and good. Can't eat that. Off limits. You cannot eat it. You can eat every other fruit, but you can't eat that fruit. All right. Now, some people will say, well, why did God put the tree there in the first place? Well, I think it's an immaterial question. He's God. He can create his creation. He's created, and he can set the parameters as he please. But that's not the point. Man didn't have to eat of the tree, since he had literally every other tree. Can you imagine the vacations that Adam and Eve could have taken? Whether they took them or not, we don't know. Could you imagine the vacations? Hopped on a couple of camels, elephants, whatever. Remember back then, there was no death. Lions wasn't eating you up. It is very possible that the very land mass itself was different. Atmosphere is different. In fact, the Bible tells us that it did not rain upon the earth until after the sin, probably even after the flood. There was no rain. There was an irrigation process that God used to water the earth. So Adam had literally everything except he couldn't eat one tree. And they fixated on that one tree. And for the life of me, I cannot understand. I cannot wait to get to heaven to ask him why. I'm sure a lot of people are like me. Why? What were you thinking? They ate the fruit. Not only did they eat the fruit, but it was a conscious, I'm going to eat the fruit. Not that they were confused. I remember people used to kind of tell me that, that the devil kind of got Eve by herself and the snake slithered up and came to Eve and says, hey, did God really say you can't eat of the tree? And then he deceived her, got her to eat the fruit, and she kind of skipped across the garden. Say, hey, Adam, eat this fruit here. And then he ate the fruit, and he's kind of like, oh no, Eve, where did you get this fruit from? What have you done? What have you done? No. Adam was right there watching the serpent deceive his wife. And he ate. He made a choice. The choice of sin. That's why the Bible tells us that as in Adam, all die. But what you need to understand about this sin, in full knowledge, Adam, I'm going to sin against God. I'm rebelling against God. So if you think about this, it's what then pagan worship. He didn't murder, right? He ate fruit, but it was the sin part of it is, I really don't care what God says. In full understanding. This is what sin always is. Sin is never I didn't understand what I was doing here. When sometimes people say, well, willful sin. All sin is willful. All of it. There are some clarifications when you read through the law of Moses about unintentional sins, things like that. In other words, the classifications take upon a kind of a different meaning in that transgressions is probably the best word. There is the difference between transgressions and sins. Transgressions is simply a stepping over the line. It's just like saying, I didn't know a stop sign was there and I went through the stop sign. Well, you still violated the law. Even though you didn't know the stop sign. Sometimes that happens, right? In your neighborhood, they might put a stop sign up. And you don't know it's there. Or maybe you don't see it's there. So the idea is that it's not intentional. It's not willful. But you still broke the law. And if a cop was to see you, he still can legally give you and justly give you a ticket for running the stop sign. What are some sins that the law kind of spell out that fit that category? But the essence of all, when you look at the very essence of the word sin, it is always willful. And it is always, I know what you said, God, I am going against you. Okay, this is the thread that we see in fallen man throughout scriptures from from Genesis to Revelation. So you see it again, and almost in every, really you can almost say in every chapter, especially in the Old Testament, but certainly in every journey of man from Genesis to Revelation, you see this sin. So that we see it with, again, from the very beginning, the exceedingly sinfulness of man. And when man is left to himself, he will default to that sin nature. We see it with Israel. I mentioned it just a few moments ago. We see it with Israel. That Israel, like any other people, had God manifest to them. God involved in their nation. And they still sinned against God. Remember having witnessed God cripple the mightiest nation in the world at the time, Egypt. God told them, I'm going to bring them to their knees and you're going to parade out in front of them in triumph victory. They witnessed that. They witnessed the parting of the Red Sea. They walked through the Red Sea and they saw the Red Sea collapse on the pursuing Egyptian army. They witnessed that. 3 months after that, they make a calf and say, this calf brought us out of Egypt, and we're going to return back to Egypt in the name of this calf who brought us out of Egypt in the first place, who broke the bondage of slavery. The sinfulness was unbelievable. And throughout Israel's history, they had a continual rebellion, a continual sin or rebelling. Okay? To the point that when God told them, starting with the prophets, the section of the Old Testament, the prophets, you're going to get judged. They ignored. Finally, it came down to when you see the time of Jeremiah the prophet. He comes on the scene about 20 years before the Babylonian invasion. And he's warning them, he's telling them, God is going to judge this nation. They ignored him. Even when Babylon is camped around Jerusalem, what Nebuchadnezzar would do, Babylon would do. One of their tactics is they would surround the city, surround the nation, something like that, usually a city, and just sit. And that's what they did. They sit 2 or 3 years. All the food dry up. All of a sudden, people are so hungry, they even resort to cannibalism. And when the people are so weak, they break the walls down and then invade them, kill them, butcher them, torture them. God says this was going to happen. God prophesied through his prophet this was going to happen. And God even told them. He even told them. He says, look, I'll tell you what, it's going to happen. You guys are going to get judged. You're going to get conquered. Israel is going to be destroyed. It's going to be completely destroyed if you surrender. Now that's the mercy. Even though God said he was going to judge them, if you surrender, it'll go well with you. You're going to get out. You're going to be invaded. You sin. And by the way, let me go back for a moment to talk about this angry God in the Old Testament, which he wasn't angry at all. He got angry at the callousness of man's rebellion. That Israel would sin over and 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 over again. And every time they would sin, God would have compassion on them. He would have mercy on them and would rescue them, would deliver them, would restore them. The Old Testament is more of a testament of God's long-suffering and mercy than his anger and vengeance, because he would always judge them at the very last resort. In other words, after sending prophets to them over and over and over and over and over and over again, that's when the judgment came. And even when Babylon came, God prophesied through the prophets and said they're going to surround your cities, they're going to rape your women, they're going to with a sword cut open the pregnant women. Horrible things will happen because you rebelled against me, because you sinned. But if you surrender to them, it will go well with you. They're going to take you back to the land. You're going to settle in their land for 70 years. Everything would be nice. Now, wait a minute. Even when Nebuchadnezzar had surrounded them, they still go, oh, no, God's going to deliver us. They threw Jeremiah in jail. Threw him in jail. The king secretly came and go, do you have a word? Jeremiah go, yeah. The word I've been giving, God says if you surrender, it'll go well with you. He says, yeah, the word is good. And went back and totally ignored it. So again, we see this over and over again. During the 7-year tribulation period that is to come, God will be judging the world. Why? Because of man's sin. Judging the world because of their sin. And Jesus is going to come, right? The beast and the false prophet will gather the armies of the world and will try to fight against Jesus. No, they will try to fight against Jesus. It's not that they're going to fight against an ideology. It's not that they're going to turn on. I mean, they're gonna literally try to fight Jesus. This is the hardness of sin. Jesus will come, destroy all those armies. Destroy all those armies. The beast and the false prophet will be thrown alive into the lake of fire. Satan will be chained up for 1,000 years. You will have peace and prosperity. No, for 1,000 years. Peace, prosperity. A person who would die at 100 years old would be considered a child. That's how great things would be. Think about deserts blooming, Antarctica, Iceland, Greenland. These kind of lands would be, paradises, right? Things would be great. Jesus would live for 1,000. And after 1,000 years, Satan is loosed, and they will rebel. Amazing, the sin. So my whole point is that why is man facing the wrath of God? Because they deserve it. Because they, in the hardness of their heart. You saw that in Pharaoh when God sent Moses. He said, let my people go. And Pharaoh hardened his heart. And what you kind of see there, you saw this sort of dance. I don't know if dance was the right word, but you saw this kind of action-reaction here. So Pharaoh hardening his heart, God then hardens Pharaoh's heart. And each time, the plagues grew more severe. And even to the point where God says, oh, I'm going to really harden his heart now. And the dummy went out. Pharaoh let his people out. Now think about this scene here. You just been defeated by the living God. They acknowledge the living God. The hardness of heart. So, what do? Oh no, who's going to be our slaves? So, master armies, and they come out as they approach the pillar of fire. Israel, by the way, they were led by a pillar of fire by day and a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day, almost like a think about a tornado-looking type thing that literally led them. This pillar of fire moved from the front of the camp of Israel all the way to the back of camp. And when Moses and his armies, Pharaoh and his armies, when they show up after being defeated by this God, plagues 10 times, the firstborn gone, all the crops destroyed, they show up and the pillar of fire blocks their way. They sit there while waiting for this pillar of fire to lift. I'm sorry, wouldn't you think they would go, there's a pillar of fire that's blocking our way. Maybe we should turn around. The hardness, though. So, they see the Red Sea part. This is Pharaoh and his armies. Nobody started to think, oh, not a good idea here. This is not looking good for us. Parts the Red Sea. They watch all of the Israelites pass through on dry land. And then there's like, don't do it, right? Don't do it. Let's go in after them through the Red Sea. That's how stupid they was. And they get into the Red Sea and God says, now release it. And the Red Sea collapsed on them. The hardness of sin. Can't even feel sorry for them. Same thing. So here's the point. When man faces the wrath of God, he is facing the wrath of God because of what? His hardness, his callous, his rebellion against God. This is what you see. It is not that God is just, I don't know, I'm just going to inflict some pain on people. And you have people that's sitting here like, well, I didn't know what was going on. I really didn't know about this gospel. I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this, I didn't know about this Jesus. And God be like, don't care. Go to hell. You didn't turn, so you burn. Okay. But the judgment seat of God will be, and this is, of course, we will see. We will come to understand. And you're going to go, wow. Just like we have the witness even in Scripture. From, again, Genesis to Revelation. Full of man's rebellious acts. And that's what God was judging. God destroyed the Babylon. The nation he used to destroy Israel. He didn't turn around and judge Babylon. Because they were brutal. They didn't have to be brutal, but they were. So, the point to understand here is even now, it looks like there are people who just really don't understand, but see, you're not seeing their heart. Sometimes people say, well, God really knows my heart. That might be your problem. See, that might be your problem. Now, ultimately, people will say, what about that lost tribe, 5,000 to 10,000 feet up in the mountains in South America, away from society. They've never had cell phone, TV, radio, anything. They don't know anything about the gospel. No missionaries has ventured in there. They're cut off from society. Will God judge them? And the answer is, well, yes. Here's a question. Why don't they know God? Let's say, for example, if a missionary didn't go, let's look at that kind of same scenario. Why wouldn't they? Why would they have pagan ways, pagan worship, pagan practices? In other words, why would I build something, and then go, this is God? This is God, right? You go on some of these pagan practices. Where did they come up with the pagan practices? What was the proof in the pagan practices? Like we see all of these kind of tribal, especially around South Africa. In South America, Africa, some of these kind of, you see these tribal things. Why do they believe what they believe? God made a God, and it's God. He kind of mocked Israel for saying, you guys are really stupid. And he did use that word. You guys are stupid. You look at a tree. You say, oh, there's the tree. You take your axe, he says. You chop the tree down. He says, now with some of the wood that you chop the tree down, you chop some of the wood, You build your house. He says with some of the wood, you make a fire, cook food. And then he says within other parts of the wood, you carve out an image, and then you bow down and you worship the very image of the wood that you chopped down from the tree that you chopped down. The question is, why did you do that? See, that's the sin nature. Because logically, there is no logical reason for a person to be a pagan. There's no logical reason to worship false gods. And by the way, people just kind of like make it up, but there's no reason for that. So why do people make it up? You see, so even if they're not judged, you look up at the sky and you go, wow, how did the sky get here? Huh? Let's not go to the fictitious lost tribe up 10,000 feet in the Amazon or South American mountains. How about evolution? We got people right now today that don't believe in God. They say there is no God, but you can look at the stars and study what they call it, astrophysics and evolution, which would in order for you to be able to say this body, your body, this creation, all sprang from nothing. That's the hardness of sin. The hardness of sin.